Good afternoon. My name is Eric Howard. I'm the Executive Director of the E2 Tech Council. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this hybrid program, which is one on an ongoing series that the Tech Council and the RU Institute are doing, mostly here at the RU in Portland, but also perhaps in the future at other locations around the state, and sometimes 100% hybrid, virtual. For those who are joining us virtually, we've got about 20 or so people here in the room. It's a pleasure to have you with us. When we started these last summer, we served ice cream. Now we've shifted to Trader Joe's cookies and Trader Joe's chocolate, which seem to be a hit for some people. The E2 Tech Council has been around for about 23 years, organizing events and programs. We've got 200 plus members, 4,000 individuals on our mailing list, and the RU is one of our many partners. Our programs, we have annual sponsors, including Eaton Peabody, Maine Biz, which is 2 blocks from here, the Maine Technology Institute, NEEP, and TRC, an engineering consulting firm. NEEP is an interesting partner. They're working with us on providing internships to younger people in Maine called Remain. The idea is that younger folks should stay in Maine as opposed to looking for jobs elsewhere. Funded by the Governor's Energy Office, and it covers half of the cost of interns. So if you'd like to have an intern for the spring or summer, let us know. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Tara Dunham, who on Thursday of last week was elected by our members to join our board.
Thank you. Everyone, thank you so much for coming today. My name is Tara, and me, along with Warren Adams, run the Climate Tech Incubator here at the RU Institute. This is a business incubator helping climate tech companies get started and scale and grow here in the state of Maine, with the benefit of all of the resources that the RU Institute have to offer. We have some incubator members here in the room, and if you're interested or have anyone that might be interested, please let them reach out to me or Warren, and we'd love to talk to them and grow the ecosystem further. Like Eric said, we do these speaker series programs about twice a month on all sorts of topics. If there's something that you want to learn about or hear about or share your expertise on, please also reach out to us, and we'd love to hear what we should think about for future programming. And we will hang around for a few minutes. After we hear from our presenters today, we'll do some in-person question and answer and for our virtual members as well. And then we will hang around for a few minutes after that, just if there's any lingering questions so that we can make the most of our time today. But thank you so much for coming. And with that, I would like to introduce 2 amazing partners of the Climate Tech Incubator. We have Mike Mansell from Heatmap News. This is a national news or international news service all about climate-related news. It is very much helped educate me as I've gotten started and working with the with our members and making sure I'm staying up to date on everything. And then we have Danny Donovan from Silicon Valley Bank here as well. And they really take a leading role with helping startup founders, but especially in the climate industry. So they release a annual news report on, or a report on the future of climate tech. And so that is the point of our discussion today, is using these 2 people who are on the front lines of everything that's going on and giving us a glimpse as we enter 2025. What can we expect? So with that. Now the right arrow is working.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you, Tara. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Warren. Really excited to be here. Sound okay? As Tara said, my name is Mike Mansell, and I'm the Vice President of Partnerships at Heatmap News. So we are about 2 years old, and Heatmap is telling the story, the inside story of the clean energy transition. So our journalists come by way of Vox, CNBC, Axios, Bloomberg, Grist, The Week, and others. And they're able to tell this story about climate and how it's impacting all aspects of society, and most importantly, the clean energy transition. And I'm really excited for today's talk, the future of climate tech. If anyone's been paying attention to the news in the last week, 2 weeks, there are a lot of things to talk about. It's perhaps never felt as dire as it has been in the last 2 weeks, but at the same time, there is a lot of room for optimism. And I'd like to dive into that here today with Danny and really understand the work that Silicon Valley Bank is doing as well, supporting all these climate tech startups, because really they are at the front lines of the clean energy transition domestically, internationally. And if there are solutions for climate, it's going to be, in many cases, coming from a partnership of public sector and private sector. And I know SVB is doing a lot to fund these climate tech startups. So a little bit just more on Heatmap. As I mentioned, the journalists that we have on staff are really incredible. We're growing. Every few months we're hiring another journalist. Most recently, we hired JL Holtzman from Axios. She's been covering the on-the-ground fights and NIMBYism of clean energy projects. And again, with the new administration, that's only going to become more of an important story that we need to tell. And the last thing I'll say about Heatmap before I hand it over to Danny for his introduction is that we do have free newsletters. We have a podcast called Shift Key. So I recommend you subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe to the podcast. We're putting out news every single day. We're putting out the podcast once a week. And it really, truly is a great way to stay on top of everything that's happening at this really pressing, important moment. So that's Heatmap.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I second the recommendation to pay attention to what Heatmap is producing on a regular basis. I particularly like the albeit depressing upfront headlines of what's happening around the world. It's climate related. It's hard to almost always negative, unfortunately, but then there's some really detailed stories that are up to date and helpful for my understanding and keeping abreast of what's going on in the world. But like Mike said, and thank you, Tara, Eric, and Warren, and for everyone attending. Danny Donovan, I'm a director in Silicon Valley Bank's climate tech practice covering the New England region. I'm based in Boston. Eric, I wish there was that young Maine intern program when I was around. I'm a Maine native, former Maine native, Colby College alum, and now a Boston resident, but love being back here in the state of Maine. So SVB, if you're not familiar, 40-plus-year-old bank focused on the startup and innovation ecosystem. We have a full suite of commercial banking products and offerings, of course, but what most know us through or by is our ability to lend to those early stage companies, primarily in the form of venture debt. We have a number of different tech sectors that we all cover. Mine, of course, is climate tech. Healthcare and life sciences has a number of their own, enterprise software, frontier tech, you name it. There's another half of the SVB balance sheet is really our fund banking practice. So all the VCs and private equity shops that you know or don't know often have relationships there, and it's all very intertwined because we're lending to trying to understand the equity side of the capital stack of many of the companies that we work with. 2 years ago, I'm sure everyone has heard of us in the past 20 however many months, of bank failure in March of 23. We were revitalized and acquired by the First Citizens Bank. And so we operate as a division, still standalone division as SVB. Same approach to market, same credit appetite, same people for the most part, and with a much larger and more diverse balance sheet. And we're happy to be here today doing what we do, because things like this and working with the companies that you have or will be starting is certainly a highlight of our jobs on a regular basis. I've skipped over, I forgot I had slides. Some real fun numbers for you all to read and memorize, I'm sure. These numbers are a little dated, but just to highlight our presence in the innovation ecosystem as of the middle of last year. A reasonable, top 20 bank, 200 plus billion in assets, and hundreds and hundreds of folks doing what we do. Again, the sector that I think we all are here for is the climate tech and sustainability practice that I represent. All things energy transition, food, water, waste, energy storage, circular economy, etc. There's I won't get into all of the fun details. You all know the sectors that we work in. I'm going to stay away from that. Can I go back? I'll leave it there. So we, as Mike and Tara mentioned, we do have an annual climate tech report we put out that comes out in a couple months. So I did not share last year's, as the world moves quickly and that information is quite dated. But we'll happily share that, and we'll have some more press and information around that in the coming months. I forgot to mention my colleague Ben Maitland-Lewis was unable to make it. Ben covers our startup banking practice, think from inception through material, institutional equity raise. That's what we call our startup banking. His family has COVID, unfortunately. It's really, I'm disappointed. He would be a perfect person to have join us here today. He is a former founder himself. He has done an incredible job helping companies not reinvent the wheel, make that startup process as easy as possible, make banking free, make banking painless, and hopefully make many connections like you all are doing here on a regular and irregular basis. But maybe we could start our discussion from there.
Yeah, sounds great. And I think just to ground ourselves here too, I should mention that I myself am not a journalist with Heatmap. I had a partnership, so I'm really on the business side. I write for Heatmap, it's sort of a hobby. I write for my local paper that's a print publication where I'm an environmental and climate columnist. I was previously on the founding team at Canary Media, where I also had a column there, but again, on the business side. So I do like to just differentiate anytime we're talking about journalism that I myself am not a journalist, but I like to write and I understand the business and importance of it. But I do have a lot of journalistic questions for you. So you touched on the first one, and it was a little bit of a hardball, but I do want to dive a little bit deeper into the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank because it has a lot of implications for the climate tech sector. And I'll just read you a quick excerpt from a Heatmap news article dated March 10th, 2023, a day I'm sure you remember very well. So my colleagues wrote, the United States witnessed its largest bank failure since 2008 on Friday, as Silicon Valley Bank ran out of cash and was taken over by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. True to its name, the bank was central to the technology ecosystem and Northern California economy. It claimed half of the country's venture-backed startups as customers. But what hasn't received as much attention is that Silicon Valley Bank was particularly important to the climate tech sector. So I guess a couple things coming out of that. One, talk a little bit more about what led to the collapse. Two, how are what guardrails are in place sort of coming out of that now, especially being part of First Credit? And lastly, what is it that led so many climate tech companies to bank with Silicon Valley Bank?
Yeah, so this is a fun one I've told a couple thousand times, perhaps. So the gist of it is banks take deposits, we invest them in other assets, yield interest-bearing assets. There is a little mismatch. There is almost always a mismatch between the longevity of client deposits and the assets that banks invest that capital in and then also lend out to other clients of the bank. The challenge was exacerbated by some potential greed on some internal folks, former employees, in terms of trying to buy longer term bonds at a slightly higher rate. Many banks do this. Many banks don't have, those banks often don't have the challenges of almost all clients are burning cash. Whereas, I assume many of you are putting dollars in the bank if you have a regular salary. Our clients all take money out on a regular basis and an irregular basis invest. There was some fear around as interest rates rose, those assets that have lower interest rates become less valuable. You don't have to mark them down. It's an accounting fund practice. There was some fear around that, but the crux of the matter really was we were a bank with thousands of clients with millions and billions of dollars, and with just a few text change, that fear can go viral really quickly, and it led to a true digital bank run. So 150 or 140 something $billion left the bank in like 20 hours. So yeah, I do remember it vividly, maybe not well, but vividly. And but more to the point, I think the answer is really we were and remain a really integral piece in the startup banking ecosystem. And because of that, there was when the collapse was realized, everyone said, well, who's going to serve these thousands of clients that formerly banked there and borrowed money from, and were able to form these lasting connections. And because of that, it's a very rare, perhaps totally unique circumstance where a bank was truly revitalized and said, "This is you're a valuable piece of the ecosystem. Please continue to do what you've been doing. It's not a risk of your banking practices, your credit practices. It was a treasury balance sheet issue on the back end of things, and now we have a combined balance sheet with First Citizens of, again, over a couple $100 billion. And I think more to the point, I think I said this already, but a much more diverse balance sheet where we have many retail clients. We have, largest rail financing company in the world. And not to mention, hundreds or thousands and thousands of startup banking clients back in the mix. So that's why we're here today.
And I guess sort of that last part, what has led so many climate tech companies to really bank with SVB? I mean, I've been in the space for 12 years now, and I heard countless mentions over the last decade plus about climate tech companies working with SVB. And I guess, is there a differentiator there?
Yeah, I think so, and my hesitation is a little ego driven. Our climate practice as a national team was started in 2008. Great timing there. But we've lasted through the ups and downs and Clean Tech 1.0 and 2.0 and wherever we are today. And we have a true dedicated team that's truly dedicated to the space, and that's all we spend our days and nights and weekends talking and thinking about, and helping clients succeed. And so I think both, of course, in our DNA is the work that we do with startups as a whole, tech startups, but our climate tech practice is unique. And a little aside, when March 10th and 11th and 12th and 13th, and we were all looking for jobs. We didn't know what would happen. And of course, there are banking jobs out there, and there are varying degrees of what people do and how much I would maybe like it. And everyone said, "Oh, you're a climate tech banker. That's cool. What do you know about technology?" I said, "Well, I'm a tech, and that's who I work with." They say, "Well, what do you know about technology?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I guess I know a subsector of technology, and that's who I want to work with, and that's who I want to spend my time trying to help succeed." And there was, you realize you have a half dozen of those conversations with what you thought were innovative competitors in your space, and you realize that no one really wants to do this because you're all doing it, and it's stinking hard. Is my PC way of putting it. It's really hard to raise money in the space to succeed long term. And we're happy to take those lumps with you.
And then another topic that we both alluded to in the introductions is the new administration. So just in the last 48 hours, Donald Trump has withdrawn from the U.S. Paris Agreement. He has halted federal permitting of wind power, and that's both offshore and onshore wind. He ended policies that support electric vehicles. And and the list goes on. I haven't even checked the news today. There might be more. So I guess one question on that is, someone who's worked in climate now for a decade plus, how are you feeling?
I'm not feeling great. I've had, since early November, some ups and downs mentally, and as a team, we're trying to get our head around where things will go. And, you know, as expected, no one has any idea where things will go. I don't know, loose cannon is the word that comes to mind. I guess where I really what I really see happening is, it's there's big ships out in the water. They're hard to turn. This is happening. There's momentum behind what we all are doing. You all are doing. I'm a supporter at best. Uh, and it needs. There's an inevitability to this. And so eh, there will be headwinds for sure. There will be some challenges for sure. But um, I don't think I'm not sure that the executive order against offshore wind will stand. I've heard that might be in dispute or disputable. So there's some hopeful there, but I think the level heads will prevail and realize that what's happening in Southern California and what happened in North Carolina and the Southeast in with Hurricane Helene will continue to happen, and there are solutions. We'll need solutions, and we'll need a lot of them. And so hopefully there's a lot of smart folks with a lot of dollars to put to work, both in their time, of course. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I think there will be some headwinds. I don't think the IRA is going anywhere. I guess maybe that was the subtext of the conversation, or the question. But um, I also have no no confidence in that answer, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard time to predict. And this event is called the Future of Climate Tech. And I think all of us are really in the dark right now. But I guess as you think about sort of the companies that you've worked with, the technologies, within the climate space that you've seen, are there any that, really excite you? Are there any that you feel might prevail even in a challenging administration?
Yeah, I mean, there are countless exciting technologies that I've seen and have learned a little bit about. Um, some that come to mind, fusion, I think, is one of the most exciting. I have no idea when, or how that will happen, commercially. But I think it will be a game changer, maybe for our children's generation, but nonetheless, it will be meaningful. Um, I think nuclear fission will have a strong several. Has had a strong year or so. I think that will continue to grow. I think uh, grid related technologies, resilient transmission, digital capabilities of the grid and microgrids will continue to expand and become meaningful solutions, or again parts of the solution to reinforcing the grid and to connecting other renewables to the rest of the grid, both nationally and globally. And long duration energy storage, I think, will have a strong few years. I think that's incredibly important. Of course, again, peak load shaving, helping renewables become more viable. The data center AI push is not to be ignored, and I think there's I might be jumping ahead. We had a few questions lined up, but AI uh, is not my world necessarily, but there are many climate climate tech climate technologies and climate tech companies who are very directly related to that problem and solution. Data centers are incredible power users. They need a ton of power transmitted to it. Within it, cooling. They likely need storage. They likely need more renewables nearby, or more baseload power, hopefully carbon free nearby. Um, or I should say that perhaps other way around. Perhaps they will move to where the power is most applicable for them. But um, those are the handful I'm most excited about. Obviously, there's myriad more that I'm sure you all are much more attuned to.
So there's a few things that you touched on that maybe we should dive into. One being long duration energy storage, one being the rise of AI. You mentioned transmission. That is becoming a huge bottleneck as we think about the build out of renewable energy. So maybe let's go a little bit deeper into long duration energy storage. So for anyone sort of not in the know, most energy storage on the grid today is using lithium-ion batteries, and those can be discharged in 4 hours. When we talk about long duration storage, we're talking about timescales much larger than that. It could be 8 hours, but it could be, depending on the technology, days. And one of the reasons why long duration energy storage is important is that weather can be unpredictable. As much grid modeling you can do, um, there will be times when the sun is not shining when you think it's going to be shining, or the wind is not blowing when it should be blowing. And that's where long duration energy storage can come into play over these long periods where you don't have wind or you don't have sun. You have this battery that was charged up by clean energy now discharging and powering the grid. And there are a lot of different technologies that you can use in long duration storage. So I'm curious if there's any that you've seen that sort of pique your interest, or anything else you want to say on long duration storage.
Yeah. So without being, I'm not technical by training. I mentioned my Colby education philosophy major, so take this with a grain of salt. But uh, there are a number of technologies I think that will really help that will succeed within long duration energy storage. Different battery chemistries, of course. The one I think has made certainly on the East Coast has made the biggest splash. Form Energy, the way they describe it is iron air. Uh, they are talking about seasonal storage, and I think there's a application or a installation here in Maine somewhere. I'm blanking on where. Lincoln, and that should be online. I think probably I'm going to guess next year. They're doing a big facility in West Virginia as well. So these are not pilot scale or demonstration scale installations. These are going to be putting electrons on and off the grid. Um, there are more, I guess, simple technologies. Think lifting big heavy rocks up high in the air and letting them spin on a basically a large screw down to create its own turbine itself. Um, Economics behind that are still, I think, to be figured out. You can do the same thing with water. And then there's a few other, I think, maybe medium duration energy storage battery chemistries out there, phosphate, lithium phosphate, for example. But and those potentially have a good application in or a role to play in electric vehicles as well. We don't all need the fast charging lithium ion that many of the EVs, or I think all EVs today have. But it's really encouraging to know it's all out there. I won't necessarily get into the complexities of where these minerals and metals are coming from, and are there enough, and where will we get them in a little bit more tenser geopolitical environment. But it's nice to know that there are other potential solutions that smart folks are working on.
And I guess going now to transmission, even before the new administration, I mean, we've been having decades of fights over land use and permitting to get transmission built, which will ultimately help the U.S. renewables industry grow, and get cleaner power grids. Is that transmission something that you've been looking at? Are you working with any companies perhaps that are thinking about transmission?
Yeah, we have a number of clients in the transmission space. I'll say if I use a company name, it's publicly available information. I won't qualify whether they're clients or not. Um, uh, but there are a number. There's folks working on simple technology, seemingly simple technologies like watching lines sag or not, and whether there's too much power, which creates heat, which creates sag. Um, there are more complex, probably AI related technologies that are measuring, the waves of electricity coming through, and whether there's an interruption at all, and they can start to predict and detect any faults that might cause fires. I don't think this LA fire was grid related, but many of the other California fires have been. Um, Overall, longer transmission requires a lot of cooling. There's some really cool technologies, no pun intended, in that space. And those, these are, to go back to an earlier question about the new administration, these are technologies I describe as purple. And I don't think, I mean, I don't know. I'm always a little bit shocked at some things that people are take offense to, but I don't think anyone's going to fight a more resilient grid and fewer fires burning towns down. So I think these technologies will be safe and funded for many years to come. Things like long duration storage. I don't see any real headwinds in that space, especially with who the new administration, Trump has surrounded himself with. Like there's a lot of tech billionaires that really want data centers to grow, and that will need a lot of power. And I think they're all in his ear, and that's and it's one of a smart decision, I think, to push in those areas. Yeah.
So I want to change gears a bit and talk about something that I know has been on your mind lately. We were chatting before that you're in the home buying process, and interest rates are a big deal when it comes to buying a home, but it also is really important for founders, lending, as well as the whole startup ecosystem. But then as clean energy projects are built and deployed, the developers and companies working on those, they are looking, the interest rates really can make or break a project. So I guess I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts on interest rates and where we are today and where we might go.
Yeah. So I should highlight we as a bank have a pretty large project finance team, also focused on renewable assets being deployed at scale. But because the way that they look at underwriting, and then the way that we as a commercial bank look at underwriting a venture debt facility to a Series A company is so fundamentally different. We operate as different entities essentially. But in those more mature technologies and more mature projects, interest rates are much more material of a factor. When we're looking at like, I'll use a Series A venture debt facility, and I'm happy to expand on that a little bit more if you're not familiar. But essentially, it's runway extending debt. You have 2 years of cash you've raised in a large equity round. uh, a venture debt facility can complement that with 25%, call it, of that round, and be on a 4-year term. So we're underwriting fully to a cash out, or beyond the expected cash out date, which gives some regulators a little bit of heartburn. They've gotten comfortable over a few decades, but those, you can imagine, if you're exploring taking venture debt for your company, whether the interest rate is 7.5 or 8.5 or 9%, it doesn't matter a lot. Not really. It's cheaper than equity, and it's cheaper. It's more advantageous than not raising additional runway extending capital. It's not right for everyone, venture debt that is, but certainly when companies are evaluating that, yes, if they have competing term sheets, that's one of the factors. But usually, a more important factor is size of the loan, life of the loan, financial covenants, that sort of thing. Um, so we've certainly seen, perhaps there's a slight decline in willingness to borrow, because there is a slightly higher debt service payment on a monthly basis. But um, when we think as a bank of interest rates, the bigger impact it has, certainly on a tech bank where we're working with many startups, as I mentioned, you're raising a lot of cash and burning it down. That cash that companies raise is more linked on a macro basis to the broader economy. So if interest rates are up, there are maybe lower. It's less favorable to invest in other alternatives. If I can buy a essentially risk-free bond for 5+%, that's a pretty good return. If the stock market, if it gets higher than 5%, which is pretty likely, but there's a far greater risk to it. Even higher risk when you're talking about investing in a fund, which would invest in startup companies. This is all to say, interest rates are more related to maybe a function of the macro environment rather than a company evaluating to borrow or not. But yes, very top of mind with the home buying process.
Um, so there's this quote that I've been seeing going around social media. Some of you may have seen it as well. And it says, climate change will manifest as a series of disasters viewed through phones with footage that gets closer and closer to where you live until you're the one filming it. This past year, 2024, we hit 1.5 degrees of warming. We had the fires in LA, which, you whether climate change was the exact culprit, maybe not, but you can certainly point to the drought being a huge impediment to that. Hurricane Helene, you talked about. There are now sort of this new wave of companies looking at climate adaptation. How do we live in a changed planet right now at this point in time? Is that something that you're following?
Yeah, and I'll say personally, I'm convinced that all these extreme weather events are climate related. That may not be the bank's official position, but it's mine. And I think, unfortunately, it will drive. Maybe fortunately, it will. There's a silver lining, I guess, but it will drive a lot of innovation and investment in mitigation and adaptation. I hope it's more. We've seen a little bit to date on I think seawalls and different prediction technologies. I hope it's a little bit more than that. I don't know what that exactly means. I hope it's not just hardening your home so you can rebuild your nice Malibu beach house. Um, uh, but I do think there will be a ton more eyes on it. That's perhaps the naive of me to think. We were chatting about this topic, and I kind of liken it to gun violence, unfortunately. And I thought surely this shooting is the one that gets people to act. Whatever shooting I'm talking about, it doesn't change anything. Even if it's your community, oftentimes that doesn't change things. Um, you all are very close to the shooting a year and a half ago. I forget, it was October. Um, and I think there was a little bit of change from Senator Golden, but there hasn't been much result that way. Same with climate change. I mean, it's there. The inauguration had to happen inside because of an extreme cold front, allegedly, and I don't know. I don't see. I'm not incredibly optimistic that that will change. I mean, I guess I'm going directly to the politics side of things, but I think there's it will drive action, these extreme weather events, um, hopefully from the right audience. That, I guess, my PC way of ending it.
I guess all these climate disasters, I work and have been working in media around climate for 12 years now, and I seesaw between this feeling of hope and doom by the minute. I'm reading about climate disasters, but I'm also reading about these new solutions from founders that, could conceivably change the course of climate change on our planet. And is that a feeling that you also grapple with? And what sort of gives you hope? Because it is very easy for me in particular to focus on the negative. But how should we be thinking about the positive today?
Yeah, this is probably you thought you had a hardball earlier. This is the hardest question for me. I think you heard me waver 3 or 4 times in that last rambling answer. I both because I'm interested in it, I work in the space. I pay very close attention to what's happening in the news, in the climate related news. And again, it's never good. There's never like, a calm weather, event or extreme calm weather event. But the counter to that is I get to say, well, at least I work with and meet the smartest people around doing the most impactful work on the planet. Um, and so that's really encouraging. I joke that I get paid to spend time and hopefully deploy money to the smartest folks around. Um, if it were not, I have these conversations with my wife on a regular basis. She's like, "Did you hear this?" And she's like, "Of course you did." I said, "Yeah, but there's this other thing. These folks are working on a solution, and it might be our children that benefit from it, but it is happening. And I think that's kind of all you can do is kind of look for the helpers type uh, uh, saying after a terrible event. Look for the people that are working on this and the solutions that are being created, because they're there and they're real. And over the past 8 or 10 years of working on with companies in the space, you get to see these things mature, and it's wild. It's really rewarding to see the founder that's like, well, I have a laptop and I have I have 6 months of that I can work unpaid, and then all of a sudden they've raised insane amounts of money. They've built facilities, they've built factories, they've had teams of hundreds of people. Really really smart people. They're not it's really rewarding to see that. um and technology is mature. Solar is not a new thing. I'm sure half the folks here have it on their roof and you're familiar with it, and there's just no question that it is the cheapest form of power in the world. And it will continue to be so for well, forever, until we get that elusive fusion. But um it is, I guess really this, working with folks and seeing the new technologies is rewarding. But you have to I have to really, it's a lot of effort to feel that reward, because it's kind of bleak at times.
Yeah, I mean, in the last 4 years with the Inflation Reduction Act, there's been so much positive momentum. There's been a huge manufacturing boom, particularly in the Southeast. Companies building solar modules and energy storage facilities. Rivian landed this 1 point whatever billion dollar deal in Georgia, um, and so on and so forth. And it's easy to sort of be fearful right now in this moment, with Trump potentially unraveling so much. But at the same time, there are huge swaths of folks in Congress and the Senate that are really going to fight for this. There are folks at the local level, at the state level, at the grassroots level. I think there's room for optimism there as well. And again, other countries too. I mean, there are leaders, in other countries around the world that really are prioritizing climate. So, there's an inkling of hope there as well. For anyone that maybe isn't yet in climate, or thinking about a career shift, what advice would you have for someone trying to make the leap?
Do it for sure. There's I 8 years ago, I moved internally from a more of a generalist credit focused role. Generalist being any sector, not just climate. To our climate practice expanded nationally, and I like to think I was chosen, but I'm pretty sure I'm the only dummy that wanted to spend their whole day thinking and working with climate tech companies. I had like 3 clients, um, and maybe it was at the time I wasn't sure it was the smartest career move. Um, but as we look at fundings and we look at um, you know uh, sector growth over the past, over that period, 6 or 8 years, whatever, I think it was 8 years. uh Climate has, from smaller base for sure, but has grown far faster than almost all other sectors. AI is probably the one that has, the speed has been unmatched in the past couple of years. um this is all to say, it's even further advanced, it being climate tech, far further advanced now. And there's, I if you're coming from, you're just graduating high school or college, or you're changing careers, whatever else you could be doing only matters if we have a habitable planet. So you can build another HR software app and probably make a bunch of money, but it only matters if the company that is buying that exists and is not underwater or on fire or uh, overrun with millions or billions of climate refugees. There's I don't think there's a more important sector to be dedicating your time to. Um, Advice other than do it. I don't know. I'm not, like I said, I'm not technical. Uh, Learn the most whatever excite you, whether it's the chemistry side of things, the physics, data science, computer science. There's so many fields that are all climate related, that I'm not the best person to say which one you should spend your time on, but you'll know it and put a climate spin on it.
I'd add to that a few pieces of advice, and some of this will be very biased in that I think reading the right media outlets, consuming sort of clean energy and climate media in order to find what really strikes you as interesting and finding your passion. And then from there, there are actually a whole host of online communities that you can find that really focus on all different technologies within climate. There's a whole Slack community around. I think they call themselves air miners, who are focused on carbon removal. There's one called the DER Task Force, which is focused on distributed energy resources. There are a lot of online communities that you can find to sort of chat with like-minded, interested folks, network, and come to events like this too. I think that's a great way to just meet people, and doors will open.
Yeah, I would add, there's a company, organization called Terra.do. They're really technical training. I've heard incredible things about what they're offering. And another community called My Climate Journey, MCJ. This is about a former, Runkeeper app founder, wanted to start something new, wanted to learn about climate, public learning journey, has turned into, a community, has turned into media, has turned into a fund. It's really, and it's all stemming from these conversations. And, you can, I can and do read as much as possible, but the real learnings is when you talk to an expert. I talk to someone who's, learned the hard way in a couple things. But yeah, have those conversations and just learn because it's moving quick.
I guess tactically, what advice do you have for founders that are thinking about maybe raising capital or sort of getting to the next level in their startup journey?
Yeah, I raising capital is really difficult. I've not had to do it directly. I'm fortunate in that respect. I don't have a company worth funding regardless, but the it's I've had many conversations with founders at the early stages, and it's your life's work to a certain extent, or oftentimes your life's work, and even if it's not, it could be the rest of your life's work, and you don't want the feeling is often, well, I don't want to sell my company for what I think is pennies in the dollar, because it's going to be a billion or trillion-dollar company down the road. um, the very blunt advice is that, well, it's going to be a $0 company if you don't have enough capital to employ the right people and develop the technology on a reasonable timeline. So I raise as much money as you can in the best possible form, and that often comes from our, well, has been coming from for our friends in the government. Um, I don't know how long that'll be around, but take advantage of it to any extent you can, because you've been paying into it, with taxes for years. Um, if you're deciding between 10 or $12 million of equity for 20 or 24% of your company or whatever the number is, I would err towards, without knowing anything else, I would err towards taking a little bit more, because running out when you're on the cusp of something, or about to run out when you're about to be on the cusp of something, is a a real challenge. We see it all the time. It's really hard, and at that point, it's debt is often off the table. Equity at that point will be at the earlier valuation. That step up in valuation isn't there yet. That's the whole challenge, um, and it raised a little bit more than you think you might need. Things are what you're doing. I don't know all your companies, but what you're doing is hard. I promise. And there will be delays. There will be more inflation perhaps down the road. I don't know what that will look like. I think you asked earlier about interest rates, about my prediction. I didn't. I definitely didn't answer that, nor will I now. But I don't. The answer is I don't know where it's going. A month ago we all thought, oh, 1 or 2 cuts this year. Maybe there's a raise this year, so an increase in rates this year. So it's impossible to predict where things will go, and you'll sleep a lot easier. Your sleep period if you have a little bit more capital.
I guess, can you talk about what at least risks are there out there in the market that could raise interest rates with tariffs or anything else?
Yeah, tariffs, and I mean, I think that will be incredibly and negatively impactful on what we are all doing. I can't see a positive angle to increasing tariffs at this point. Certainly not with Mexico and Canada.
I guess what's the
Yeah.
mechanism in which tariffs are raised, and then how do we get to higher interest rates from there?
Yeah. Sorry. So I'm not gonna pretend I've passed economics twice, but I think I certainly graduated from the schools. But tariffs are just a tax on at the border, and they're going to increase. The prices have to increase, or else companies can't afford to sell them. As prices increase, wages will be, the wage increase will be demanded, and it's a vicious cycle. As the Fed will try to quash that cycle, the price increases by increasing the cost of money for folks to borrow, banks to borrow, and it's really hard, as we learned in end of 21 or 22, 23. It's really hard to quash inflation, and the Fed will try a little bit harder next time. That means ramping up. I'm guessing, assuming it's still the same folks at the Fed. But yeah, it's really just the risk of that vicious cycle, increasing prices and the cost of money.
So I think we're gonna have to wrap up in just a minute, but maybe we'll part with I don't know, what one more thing that you're sort of excited about or positive in the outlook going into 2025. I mean, I know we've touched on some of it, but might be nice to end with a positive note.
Yeah. At the risk of repeating myself, I am always excited by talking to folks working on new companies, new business ideas, and I kind of get the feeling we're all a little reinvigorated, knowing that it's going to be a slog or a challenge the next few years, or it very well could be. But there's going to be some silver linings to it, and I think the pace of change is increasing and all in the right direction. It's been a pleasure, like I said, to watch other technologies mature and become real solutions. My parents own an electric vehicle. I didn't think that would happen. And they're in Wyndham, so they're not like maybe the classic EV owner. But I'm encouraged by just how it's become mainstream, and the amount of folks working on the amount and the quality of folks working on the problem. But I'm not going to let you get off the hook that easy. I need some positive news from you, because I've said everything in climate change news is negative. You're in climate change news, so let's hear the positives.
I mean, without rehashing everything, I think the gates are open. Costs have fallen so much for clean energy. Like, there are going to be a lot of barriers still, but it's still economical in many ways to install solar, especially on a large scale. Wind, even if we can't do it here in the United States, it's still going to be deployed internationally. And then to your point, you know, there's this mass adoption with induction stoves, with electric vehicles at the consumer level that could really hit an inflection point, and it seems to be close to it. I think with EVs, I drive a Chevy Bolt, and my wife was very hesitant to get electric, and she wouldn't let me take it up today because she's driving it today. And I think that the more people get their hands on these solutions where they're realizing it's not a sacrifice, but in fact, that in many cases there are better products, that will continue to drive. So I'm optimistic for the technologies, for the solutions, and at the end of the day, for the people that are going to be leading the energy transition, because we really don't have a choice otherwise. So do we want to take questions?
Thank you both so much. We've got about 5 minutes, 3 minutes for questions before like the program officially ends. And then if you guys can hang out, we'll make sure we get to any extra questions in here. I'll carry the microphone around. Can you introduce yourself with your name and where you're from so we have a little context to your question?
Hello, everyone. Hi there. Great speech. My name is Ariadne. I'm from Maine. I work at a startup, and we make material that is biodegradable for the environment and healthy for us, and based out of Maine. My question is about, so I know there's a lot of things that we hear in the media that is saying that we could have a hard time in the future because some of the things that we've been focusing on for sustainability has entered a backlash, unfortunately. I'm wondering if you've seen anything that we need to listen to that we can start to utilize in our speech, such as, okay, so we have tariffs talking about being American made. What have you started to hear that's been rising above the noise that is continuing on that momentum that we all see?
Yeah, it sounds like a consumer-facing product, right? And I think the way I look at the circular economy, maybe that's not exactly where you place yourself, but broadly speaking, there's often a health benefit to it as well. I think of microplastics and trying to reduce single-use plastics, and so I would argue almost certainly what you're making might be more expensive than a styrofoam cup or a container, but it's not a green premium. It's a health benefit. It's more than it's of course there's who knows where tariffs will go, but there are cost benefits to being made in the U.S. and I think you'll probably get some incentives there as well. Yeah, I argue it's the full from all angles the benefit to the planet, benefit to the user, and I'm sure there's some manufacturing benefits where you don't have to wear a gas mask to manufacture it as you probably should be when you're producing a styrofoam or polystyrene or whatever. So those are my first thoughts.
I guess the only thing I'd add, so my colleagues at Heatmap wrote this incredible series last year called Decarbonize Your Life, and trying to take back this now maligned idea of the carbon footprint, putting all of the onus on us as individuals, but instead thinking about what are the system level impacts we can change collectively. So for instance, if I buy an EV and you buy an EV and all of a sudden a lot of us start buying EVs collectively, that's going to make a dent in emissions. It's going to incentivize more, the supply chain for lithium-ion batteries, and it becomes a sort of self-repeating cycle. So, it's this individual effort you have to make, but collectively, it will make a difference, and sort of governments and corporations will have to react to that. So, and that doesn't exactly answer your question, but thinking about the collective is my answer.
We have a question online.
Can state governments step in where the federal government is stepping back in clean tech investments?
Yes. I do. I think Mike mentioned that. Yeah, I think that's one of the solutions that will have to see implemented, both state and I think international. I think we touched on it a little bit, but it's almost everything I see is U.S. based and U.S. focused, but it's a global problem, and there'll be many global solutions. But yeah, there are a lot of really positive state incentives. Whether it's for Eric mentioned the Remain. I don't know if that's a climate focused initiative, but it could be used as such. I anticipate. I know there are a bunch in Massachusetts, certainly in Western Mass, for similar reasons, trying to get people to a lower cost area or lower cost living area, and get the right folks to move to those areas. Not to mention, there's plenty of state taxes to be avoided or incentivized. So yeah, I do think that'll be a reasonable solution.
And that question was from David. He's one of the founders here at the Rue Institute.
Thanks, Mike Smith. I'm with Wilmington Trust. I'm just curious, given the pending environment here over the next 4 years, are there opportunities for U.S. founders to maybe shift to overseas markets and opportunities for, particularly in Europe, the UK, Scandinavia, places like that, it could be a lot more favorable? And similarly, are you seeing non-U.S. investors, sovereign wealth funds, VC funds, family offices maybe have a bit of a renewed interest to take advantage of the fact that there's a funding gap possibly in the U.S.?
Yeah, yeah, we certainly are seeing tons of foreign capital, sovereign funds, corporate VC arms. I think take advantage of the innovation that's happening here. It's absolutely folks are and should and will expand internationally as appropriate. The as appropriate is key, of course, where there's often, almost always in these challenging technologies that everyone's building, licensing or permitting or some sort of government handshake that no like bribe implied, just like needs to have some sort of relationship and kind of approval inside that country. So I only say that to highlight that at the earlier stages you have to kind of pick one or two markets before you can expand too far. I think that those proof points can be maybe more easily made abroad in different countries, and maybe more impact made in different countries. But it's more than just a website with a in Swedish, and put a salesperson on the ground. Almost certainly. So that's my only caveat or hesitation there. But absolutely, I think many of the solutions should be implemented first in other countries. I think some of in fact, there's a couple examples I will not mention, I think are sometimes where it's easier to sell next door, but that's you're offsetting nominal amount of emissions, as opposed to going to the global south where there's tremendous need for clean cooking, and there's the challenge of that, of course, is economics and trying to make that work. But there's a middle ground, and it doesn't have to be here in Maine. It doesn't have to be in New England. It doesn't have to be in the U.S. Hopefully it is, though.
Thanks. We have a question from online. Chris Roy from Acadians would like to know, what can a startup founder benefit from working with SVB?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think there's a number of ways we try to help folks. I mentioned earlier my colleague Ben, our early stage banking practice, trying to make things as painless as possible, as seamless and smooth as possible. Working with, there's several hundred of us in our Boston office that are all ready and willing to come see you and help in any way we can make these connections. If we can help introduce to sources of capital, we are more than willing to do so. That's typically on a double opt-in basis so that we don't overwhelm either founders or our funders. But our network is vast. I mentioned our fund banking practice. That's there because it's a good lending business, but it's there initially because we wanted to be closer to those funds and better understand how they view the world, and how they view their portfolios. And so sharing those insights, our climate tech report is one of dozens of annual reports that different sectors and practices put out. And just trying to, our DNA is early stage tech companies, and that's all we try to help with and help those companies succeed.
Awesome. Sounds like you guys can hang around for a few more minutes, but I think since we're a few minutes over, we should officially wrap. Thank you, Danny and Mike, for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. And thank you all for coming and asking those great questions. And we hope you'll continue to show up for our programs and engage with our community here. And we are the hope for the future.
I have one quick question for those who are here in the room. We had self-service registration starting at just at noon. And if you didn't check off your name or write your email address because you weren't pre-registered, please do that at the desk just so that we know you're here and we can invite you to future ones. Thanks.